In my previous video, I covered the building process of this tiny house up to the point of applying house wrap. Check the description if you'd like to watch the first part and get caught up. In this video, I'm picking up right where I left off, so let's jump into it. As I mentioned in the last video, we skinned 2 walls with siding before standing them up, but left the other 2 bare because the siding should line up flush, and I was worried about placing the siding without the 2 next to one another. So we started off by attaching the siding to those remaining walls. If you look at the foundation, you'll notice that we attached some 2x material temporarily to give us a lip to set the siding on and make attaching it much easier and quicker.
There we go.
How's that?
Yep.
Oh, we're so flush. Are you kidding me?
No.
Ah! That's so satisfying. Also, it's worth noting that the siding is overhanging the foundation by about 1 inch. And this is so when it rains, the water will run off to the ground instead of having access to the bottom plate of the wall. We wrapped around to the front and repeated by first placing the 2x material to the foundation, then setting the material in place to be attached. However, those of you with building experience probably already caught the error. See, the windows need to be installed before the siding so that the window flanges are behind the siding. We knew this, but simply got caught up working and moving and forgot. Unfortunately, that meant we had to take down the siding we just put up, pound the nails out, and then set them aside. To install the window, we first cut out the house wrap, and this is similar to the big double door in the previous video, but on windows you cut in a capital I, slicing horizontal along the top and bottom, then a vertical slice down the middle. You can wrap the side excess around and staple it to the inside of the window framing, but then for the top you cut 2 diagonals from each corner to create a flap, and I'll show you why in just a few seconds. Next was to prep the windows and actually salvage these windows from somebody throwing them away. So first we did a little bit of cleaning, then placed a heavy line of Titebond Weathermaster Ultimate Sealant along the top, left, and right flange. You want to leave the bottom clean so that if water does find a way in, it has a way to run out. We then placed a few wedges in the windowsill, then being careful not to get sealant all over our hands, we placed the window inside the opening and on top of the wedges. On the inside and centered the window in the frame, then on the outside I leveled it up. Once everything looked as it should, we attached it with a few nails through the window flange, then used tape to seal off the left, then the right side. And now you can see where that flap we created earlier comes into play. See, it folds down and over that top flange of the window, then the tape is applied. This is so that if any moisture does get behind the siding, it will be guided to stay on top of the window and house wrap instead of going behind it. Now that we have the windows in, we can go back to siding. Again. We still use the temporary blocks on the foundation to make it easier, but this time we had a cutout for the windows before placing the sheets up. To do this, we would grab some measurements, make the majority of the cut using a circular saw, then finish off the corners with a reciprocating saw. We would set it in place and tack it with a few nails. Then, while I was finishing the nailing, Anne would be making the cutout for the next sheet. Getting into a system like this, the step really does go quickly. You just want to make sure to pay attention to the tongue and groove orientation as you are making your cuts so that the sheets line up properly to one another. Moving around to the front, we repeated the steps for the house wrap and installing the window. But once we got the window to a stage where one person can handle it, we took measurements for the cutout so Anne could start working on the siding while I finished the window. The only reason I point that out is because working in this way is how Anne and I were able to get so much done in just a few days. We would divide up the task so that as one of us finished something up, the other one would be starting or prepping the next thing. I say nail that sucker.
Okie dokie, artichoke.
Up next was framing out the roof. As you saw from the finished build of the tiny house, this has a lean-to style roof with just a single pitch. And to create this, we started building what I know to be called a pony wall, where we build up a small wall in the front that the rafters will rest on, but the backs will rest against that double top plate. We built this pony wall using all of the cutoffs from the framing of the building, as all of these pieces needed to be short little guys. I not only cut the pieces to length, but also cut the roof pitch angle on the top. Since the rafters will be placed 16 on center, these are also placed on 16 centers. Once making it to the end and getting all of the cripples attached, we placed a single 2x4 across all of them and attached it. And this will create a solid resting place for the rafters in the next step. Anna and I worked out a system where we first made one board to act as a template for the rest. After testing this template, we used it to trace the cuts needed onto all the other rafters. Which, speaking of, the next step was to start cutting the rafters. The backs of the rafters will have a bird's mouth cut in, so it will sit down on top of the top plate. And this cutout is made with a circular saw, then is finished up using a reciprocating saw. The front of the rafters will have a seat cut, and it's also made with a circular saw for the majority of the cutting, but is then once again finished with the reciprocating saw. You can finish these cuts with a circular saw alone, however, you have to go past your cut on both and you end up overcutting the board in both locations, and I've read that this weakens the integrity of the board. So I stay away from it if I have a reciprocating saw on hand. We are working with limited space as we only have the doorway to utilize as a workbench. So instead of flip-flopping around to make all of the cuts needed, I would make the long seat cut with my saw, pass the board to her, and she would make the opposing cut with her saw, and then finish it off with the reciprocating saw. And this allowed us to work quickly, but not be in each other's way by having to flip from one side of the board to the other. Now to attach the rafters. To make things go quick, we first marked off the 16-inch layout on the back top plate, as well as that pony wall top plate. This way we could get a rafter into place and very quickly see where it needed to be aligned in the front as well as the back, then attach it with a nailer. Now you'll see that instead of relying solely on the bird's mouth cut to line up these rafters, I'm pulling a measurement on each one from the front and using that mark to line up to the front top plate. And just a side note, by placing the rafters in line with these cripples, then also in line with the studs of the wall below, it just gives the whole structure a little bit more integrity. We repeated the process all the way down until all the rafters were in place. Another system tip to work quickly is after I'd get my end stuck, I would pass the nailer to Anne, but while she was working on sticking her end, I would be grabbing the next rafter and setting it in place. Okay, next up, we added a few cripples to both of the side walls, then started attaching the subfascia.
Got it. Toss. Oh, that was horrible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, shoot. Sorry, Annie. We were working with just a single ladder tall enough to get to the roof, so we attached a temporary block so Anne could pass up the fascia, have something to set it on, and something I could pivot it on while I aligned it to the rafters and nailed it in place. Okay, go down if you can. You can see that I'm using my speed square to line it up to the top of the rafters. You don't want it going past or it'll mess up your roof sheathing in the next step. If it needed adjusting, Anne would either pull or push it to line it up. We repeated the process along the back, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but we left an overhang on both the left and right side because up next we'll be making the fly rafters, which is what creates the roof overhang on the left and the right of the building to match the front and back overhang.
You ready?
Ready. And you can see here just how simple that was. Anne stayed on the ground and cut all of the pieces, then passed them up to be attached. And that, my friends, are the bones to the roof. So now we just need to deck it. Since it's just the two of us, getting the full sheets of OSB up to the roof was a little bit challenging, but Anne came up with a great way to make it happen. She first laid a sheet on her tractor bucket and attached 2 feet on either side. We strapped that down securely to the bucket and used it as a platform with a shelf for the rest of the boards to be loaded onto. You can kind of get the idea here on how it'll work once it's loaded. Once we were confident that it would work, we very quickly unloaded, then loaded the sheets from the back of the truck onto this platform. And yes, we took the time to carve a path wide enough for a truck to get to the job site because we were both sick and tired of carrying everything back here. Now the bucket could be lifted as high as it could go, and Anne just had to rotate one just enough for me to grab it, and then from there I could pull it the rest of the way up to the roof. Hey, if you're not strong, then be resourceful. Now, Anne isn't a huge fan of roofs, so I did the majority of the high work while she stayed on the ground to make all of the cuts needed. And I would actually recommend this system instead of making the cuts up on the roof because the sawdust creates a very slick situation. When starting on the decking, I started at the back so that I could create a walking surface as I worked towards the front. And the first sheet was ripped down so that it landed center on a stud, and then the next sheet could be a full one. On the second row, we made sure to stagger the seams by one stud bay, then continued on the same until the entire roof was decked. And with that complete, we started laying down roofing paper. We started at the back because whenever you lay down paper, you want to overlap it so that if water finds a way in, it won't be able to get to the decking. If you start at the front with this roof orientation, then the overlapping row will create a seam like this. Water running downhill will run right into it. However, starting at the back with the overlapping seam like this, water will run right over it. Now the paper comes with printed lines on it to indicate where to place the overlap. So we laid down row after row using a slap stapler to attach it and pulling it tight so there weren't any wrinkles in it. The last thing we were able to do on the roof, because we were waiting on roofing material to be delivered, was to apply the drip edge. This is a very quick step as you simply nail it on all four sides using a pair of tin snips to cut the corners so that it can nicely wrap around it. And like I said, we were waiting on roofing material to show up. So next we moved back down to the body of the building to finish it up. First we applied house wrap to the pony wall we built earlier. You can see that we left a flap of the house wrap on those lower walls. And we made sure to tuck this behind the new layer, then staple it all at the same time. Next we place the Z flashing down on the lip of the siding before placing on any upper siding. This has a profile where a part will tuck behind the upper siding, but then lip over the bottom siding, and this will guide the water out and away from the seam instead of being a potential spot where moisture could get in.
Woo! Epic glove. April, we're freaking killing it.
After taping the top part of the Z flashing, we filled in the rest of the pony wall with siding. At this point, we only had a few more hours to work, so we tackled all of the trim work. Well, not all of the trim work, as we didn't get to install the soffit, so the top trim was left off, but everything else, the corners, the windows, the bottom trim, it was all cut and attached using the nailer. The very last thing we had time to do was install the door. And the only reason we put it off this long is because the floor of the tiny house was our main work surface. But when installing the door, it turned into a mini project because apparently I modeled the size of the reclaimed door Annie had, so the opening was about a foot too large. Oh no. We have a big problem. Like a big gaping problem. 2x4s?
Yeah.
It was a pretty awful feeling, but I will say that at least the hole framed was too big versus too small, as too big is much easier to fix. What we did is we centered the door, then filled in the sides with some extra 2x4s. Then, to get a really clean line to patch in a piece of siding, we set up a straight line fence and used a circular saw to rip a clean edge on both sides. And this allowed us to almost seamlessly extend out the siding and cover up those 2x4s. Okay, this is much better. And honestly, even though it was embarrassing to make the mistake, it was a simple fix. So take it as a lesson. One, the whole measure twice thing. But then two, don't go into a project thinking that you're not going to make a mistake. Instead, go into it with the attitude on if you make a mistake, that you're going to work through it. Because it happens to everybody. Okay, my time has expired here in Washington. I have to head back to Texas. So, Ann still has to finish up
the entire exterior, painting, soffits, all of that stuff, building a ramp, outfitting the front yard, building furniture on the inside, installing the tiny stove and the kitchen.
So it's still quite a bit, so be sure to follow Ann if you want to catch updates on the tiny house and it progressing. Also, if you're interested in a set of plans, then check the link down in the description. I hope that we've inspired you to build something with your best friend. It's absolutely amazing what you're able to, I got goosebumps.
I do too.
It's absolutely amazing what you're able to accomplish in 7 days, especially whenever you're having fun and motivated to do it. So,
This was one of the best weeks of my life.
aw,
Building an awesome.
goosebumps.
Stop that! You're making me cry.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. I'll see you back in Texas. Be sure to follow Ann. I hope you all enjoyed the build.
Oh, waves?
You can wave.
Should we do your wave?
I waved. Do you want to wave?
Is it this?
It's this. Okay. You can do left-handed if you want. Ambidextrous.
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 All right.
Dang.
How about that?
How's about that? All right, nail it away, Chica.
There we go.
Perfect.
Like a rock.
Oh, like a rock. Like a rock. Why do you get bad songs stuck in my head?
Sorry. If
Sing a
you
good song.
would stop saying such awesome catchphrases.
I didn't say like a rock.
Control myself.
You said like a rock, and then you started singing the song. Do not blame this on me.
Well,
Aw,
what?
I'm bleeding.
Oh, gross! Don't get that shit on my ladder.
Your ladder already looks like a
Just kidding.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Massacre?
Massacre.
That was close.
I grew up poor, April.
You found the ladder, Annie.
Up on the rooftop. Meow, meow, meow.
One
How
sheet
did that
down.
song go? Up on the rooftop.
Drip, drip, drip.
Not drip.
Down comes the spider, and
I thought that was a Christmas.
I'm a tea cat. Oh, I don't know. I think we're mixing up like 3 songs.
I'm pretty sure that's a Christmas song.
Dang, that's pretty.
Oh my gosh, baby girl.
My bad.
Okay, well, I don't like hearing you scream. I thought you were hurt. I just was a little worried for a second that you were hurt.
No, it just hit me in the head and hurt me in my pride.